Well, good afternoon, everybody. Hello. I'd like to thank you all for coming out here. Look forward to we're here to celebrate the life of our friend, Dean Ketelsen. One thing before we get started, before I forget, will everybody please take their phones and silence them? Okay, so if we've got everything on silence, then again, want to welcome everybody. Just, for the plan for today's events are essentially after my introduction here, then Roger is going to go ahead and go over his biography. Okay, with that, I think we're good to go. And I'd like to introduce those most of you know. We have Roger Chirajoli, and he will go over his biography.
Hello, it is working. Hello, everyone. I want to thank you all for coming today. We are here, of course, to celebrate the life of our brother, friend, colleague, Dean Ketelsen. Is that better? Can you hear me? Okay, there you go. I didn't want it to blare too loud, but if this is okay, I'll hold it here. At any rate, I have oh, there we are. There he is. Thank you, Stuart, for your introduction. And I just want to tell you, I am certainly not, I'm not the one that knew Dean the longest in this room, but I knew him for 25 years, since 1998. Dean was a special guy to all of us in different ways. He was a very special man to me because at a very difficult time in my life, when I had to escape from an employment situation that I really hated, I accidentally came across Dean on the internet, and he said, well, why don't you apply for a job at the Mirror Lab? And I said, they'll never hire me. I don't have any experience. He said, oh yeah, just go ahead. Just apply. And I did. And they hired me. And it was really the luckiest stroke of my life because I came to Tucson, I was an amateur astronomer, and Tucson is a great place, of course, for amateur astronomy. And it's just gone by in a flash. And I know many of you, even his sisters and brother and sister-in-law, it's all gone by in a flash for you too. And it was even longer than for me. Anyway, so today, my talk today is just meant to give a biographical overview of Dean and his achievements. And we are going to see many pictures in the presentation that Dean took over the years, many even of himself. I don't know, he might have taken this one of himself up on top of Baba Kivri because he was an expert in selfies long before selfies were, as they say nowadays, a thing. Anyway, we think of Dean usually as a superb optician, which he was, and as a superb amateur astronomer, which he was, and he made many contributions to the university, to the Mirror Lab, to the TAAA, the Tucson Amateur Astronomy Association, which meets in this room every Friday, the first Friday of every month, and to the formation of the Grand Canyon Star Party. But something that's maybe less known about Dean, or maybe just a little bit known about Dean, is also that in a way his greatest gift of all, besides his lovable nature, was that he was an excellent photographer. And we'll see, as I said before, many pictures that Dean has taken. And Dean was really an expert in light and shade and composition and color. He has a good friend, Ken Spencer, who was a professional photographer, worked at the New York Times. And Ken told me recently, sometimes I'm just ashamed when I see Dean's pictures because there's so much, he spent so much more time on them than I spent on my own pictures. And that's from a professional photographer. So in the slides to come, you'll see many striking images. There are more images that Dean took out in the lobby. Dean took not only still photographs, he took, let's see, could I have the, okay. So I'll just say next slide. Okay, so slide 2. Dean, his subjects were, I'm gonna hang on one second until we can start to advance. Yeah, there we go. So on the left is Dean the optician, and on right is an old picture, very old picture of Dean the amateur astronomer, looking very young and vigorous, as he did in those days, and handsome. Next slide, please. Dean later in life, Dean the photographer, and he had a ton of photographic equipment, much of it still at the house. Mixed photographic chemicals from 1991, because Dean didn't throw anything away. Dean recently on the right, he took in that calendar, there's a picture of ice crystals on a dandelion, and Dean was very proud of the picture, and it was included in a calendar. Next slide, please. But Dean, although Dean took nature pictures, he took pictures of the sky, of flowers, insects, all manner of things. But he also took portraits of people, and he took many portraits of many people. But the person that I think was his muse, who left us all too soon, was his second wife, Melinda Johnson, shown here in a beautiful composition, 2 beautiful compositions by Dean after Melinda was already being treated for cancer after 2008. And the color, the texture, Melinda's radiant face. This was really Dean's photography at its best. Dean also loved, next slide, please. Dean took pictures not only in visible light, but in infrared. So the scene on the right is Tucson in infrared. It doesn't look like what we're used to seeing, but it's just this beautiful, striking panorama. And on right, Melinda at Ebert Fest. Dean was a huge fan of film. He loved film. He watched movies almost every day. And I think it was because it was the photographer in Dean that he just gloried in the visual spectacle of what really great cinematographers and directors could achieve in film. Next slide, please. So from the beginning, as you know, as probably you know, Dean was born in 1953 on a farm in eastern Iowa, and he grew up to farming. And his siblings still farm. Some of his siblings still farm. And although he came to Tucson early, he never lost his love for the Midwest, for Iowa, Illinois, and he had a deep bonds of affection for his family. We see him on the right with his sister Kathy, who's here, and on the left with his parents as a young boy. Next slide, please. And these are family photographs, many of which, some of which Dean himself took, both when he was a young man and older in life. We see a recent photo of Dean with a great niece down here in a pose that is very Dean and very affectionate, but playful as well. And Dean with all of his sisters and brothers. And the playful side of Dean sometimes got even a little bit out of hand. If we could have the next slide. And the slide on the right, of course, is the slide on the left, maybe not what we were expecting from Dean, but the slide on the right is very Dean. And we all love that slide of Dean with his great, I believe that's his great niece, Olivia. And so we can go on now to the next slide, slide 9. So Dean, this is more the Dean that we know, the amateur astronomer. So Dean, in middle school, he got his first telescope. And I believe this is a picture of him with the first telescope on the left. And he fell in love with astronomy, and that really determined the course of his life. And so when he graduated from high school, he went on to the University of Iowa, and he got a degree in astronomy and physics and he graduated in 1976. And he worked, there's Dean as a young adult on the right, and he was working at a station of the University of Iowa where they had a 24-inch Bowler-Inch-Ivins telescope. And those of you who are amateur astronomers or professional astronomers, this was a big name kind of telescope. This was not a big telescope at the time in 1976, but Bowler-Inch-Ivins was great stuff. So Dean had reached the big time already at that stage, and he was about to reach an even bigger time. He in 1976 there was a great comet, Comet West, and Comet West was a sun grazer, and Comet West broke up on its passage around the sun. And although I don't have a picture of this here in the room, there is a copy of Dean's pictures that he took through this telescope that's out in the lobby showing the breakup of the nucleus of the comet. And Dean was one of the first observers to photograph the breakup of Comet West and to report it. Next slide, please. Dean desperately wanted to come west, and he wanted to work on, he really wanted to reach the big time. He didn't want to be a professional astronomer. He wanted to be an observer and a telescope operator. And so he got a job finally in 1979 with at Kitt Peak with the NOAO, and he came out west. I think this photograph on the left is probably a selfie. It's extremely well composed. Dean is directly under the dome of the 4-meter Mail telescope, and that's where Dean worked. He was a telescope operator on the Mail telescope from 1980 until 1984, and he took many plates when he wasn't doing his professional work assisting astronomers. He took plates on this telescope and on other telescopes on Kitt Peak, and those plates will be going, I believe, soon. Dean kept them. We have them. They're beautiful. They show great progress in astrophotography, Dean's personal progress in astrophotography. And the Mail telescope, of course, was the largest telescope in the Southwest and one of the largest telescopes in the world at that time in 1979. And so I have a plate from Christmas 1979 of M81 and M82. The astronomers will know what those are. It's a beautiful plate full of detail, and the plates are going to be going, I hope, soon into the Stewart Observatory plate archive. Next slide. Dean worked on Kitt Peak until 1984, and he made friends on the mountain with one of the, I believe he was a site manager, Bob Goff. And Bob Goff was a great friend of Dean's. Bob Goff was an optician, well-known optician. He had worked at Celestron in the 1970s, and he worked for himself. And he had a wonderful wife named Valerie, who's there with Bob. This is obviously taken before 2001 when Bob died prematurely. And Dean was best man at Bob and Valerie's wedding. I don't know the date of the wedding, but I think it may have been Dean's connection to Bob Goff, and many people in this crowd probably remember Bob Goff and knew him back in the day when he was alive. I'm not sure on the right, I'm not sure if that might be the TAAA's 30-inch mirror. Maybe somebody, it is, yeah, okay, so Terry says it is. So the mirror on the right, Dean and Bob were working on a 30-inch mirror that the TAAA was supposed to have, years ago, but the project never came to fruition. But I'm thinking maybe partly under the influence of Bob Goff, Dean decided after a few years on the mountain that he was kind of tired of being up there in the cold in the winter and driving to and fro from Tucson to Kitt Peak, that maybe he would come back to town and apply in town for a job in town. And he did, and he was hired at Optical Sciences to work down in the basement of Optical Sciences. Next slide, please. And this is a well-known picture, circa, I believe, 1985. Does that sound about right? Yeah. So the gentleman on the right, Bob Parks, is here with us today, and obviously Dean and Carrie Kittrell, who those of us that worked at the Mirror Lab, and Dave Anderson, those of us who worked at the Mirror Lab will remember very well Carrie, who retired only a few years ago, and Dave Anderson, who worked at the Mirror Lab for a long time until he moved out east to run his own optical business. Carrie was our Mirror Lab programmer. And these were all people who were important at the U of A. And Dean liked working on optics so much that when it became feasible, I believe in 1990, next slide, please. In 1990, when the Mirror Lab located to its present location under the east wing of the football stadium, Dean got a job with Roger Angel and the Mirror Lab, and he was one of the first, I believe, employees at the Mirror Lab once it was located where it presently is after 1990. So we have an early picture of Dean on the left at the large optical generator, the log, in its old configuration, working on maybe a 3.5 meter mirror. On the right, a recent picture of Dean looking very animated and happy, maybe another selfie. And then down below, Dean working on, we believe, the first GMT mirror with Dr. Buddy Martin, who's here with us today and is going to talk about Dean's work at the lab. For many years, let's see here, this is slide 13. Okay, so for many years, Dean was really the face of large optical fabrication, the nitty-gritty side of optical fabrication at the Mirror Lab. And he pushed all of that forward. He pioneered things in conjunction with other people at the lab. This is really Dean's prime professional legacy, is that he was a superb, a large optics optician. He pushed forward he helped to push forward large optics and in the nitty gritty of large optics and getting things done, working on the largest, on historic mirrors, the largest single piece mirrors that have ever been made in history for telescopes. And at the end of his life, Dean continued to make history, working with Dr. Roger Angel, who's in our crowd today, working on the LFAST project, which we hope will produce 50,000 small mirrors, which will be used in tandem, and they will explore for direct signs of biological life in the universe. Moving on then to Dean's personal life, slide 14, please. So in 1990, Dean married his first wife, Vicky Quave, and on their honeymoon, there's Vicky on the extreme left. On their honeymoon, they went to the Grand Canyon. And Dean noticed that whenever he set up a pair of binoculars or a telescope, huge crowds would assemble. And so being Dean, he decided that, well, next year, and at night, people would crowd around if there was a telescope. And so he worked with the TAAA, and from 1991 on down to the present day, they set up a Grand Canyon Star Party. Now, this wasn't the first Grand Canyon Star Party, but you can see there's Dean at the bottom in front of the Grand Canyon Star Party poster, and in the back here, Dean was very proud of this the people in the silhouette there are Bob and Valerie Goff. And Bob Goff wanted to go to the Orion Nebula when he died. And so you can see the constellation Orion rising. And that was a Dean touch. Bob died in 2001. Unfortunately, Valerie died in 2011. And Valerie was a dear friend to several of us in this room. And on the right, you can see Dean with John Dobson. John Dobson, of course, is a very famous person among amateur astronomers, made it feasible for amateur astronomers. A big telescope for an amateur astronomer in 1980 was an 8-inch Newtonian. A big telescope now for an amateur astronomer is a 1-meter reflector. And that was largely due to innovations that John Dobson introduced among amateur astronomers. John Dobson briefly had a star party at the Grand Canyon, but that fell into abeyance. Dean revived it in 1981. And this year was, I believe, the 32nd or 33rd anniversary of the Grand Canyon star party. Next slide, please. Dean and Vicki were married from 1990 to 2003. Unfortunately, Vicki died tragically of pancreatic cancer in that year. And as her father had died before her, and it was a huge blow to Dean, and it had a huge effect on his health afterwards. And his health began to decline slowly after that. Slide 16. I just have a few more slides. But 5 years later, due to Dean's friend Jane Tongate, who is here. Where's Jane? Jane's here. There's Jane up there. Due to Jane. Dean also loved to bicycle. Dean rode in the El Tour de Tucson, and he rode in an annual bicycle race across Iowa every year. And he rode in El Tour de Tucson with Jane. And Jane's friend Melinda Johnson was introduced to Dean, and they fell in love. And in 2008, 5 years after Vicki died, Dean married Melinda, and everyone was so happy for Dean. And you can see here's Valerie at the wedding. The wedding had a Hawaiian theme because Dean and Vicki and Melinda loved Hawaii. On the left is one of my personal favorite pictures of Dean and Melinda, New Year's Eve 2008, with the crescent moon in the background and Venus up top, and Dean and Melinda sitting in front of a chimenea fire in Dean's backyard. Next slide, please. Well, actually, let's go back. I'm sorry. Unfortunately, however, Melinda also died. She got cancer, and she died in 2016. So they had a wonderful 5 years together, and then she got cancer, and slowly her life ebbed away, and she died in 2016. And that was really the final blow for Dean, and his health declined afterwards, and he became the man that we knew in his final years. So different from the vigorous young man that you saw in earlier slides. Next slide, please. A couple more slides. Dean was very important to the Tucson Amateur Astronomy Association. Couple slides here. In early days, up top left, at what they called Gab Fests, where they would all sit around and talk with John Zajac. Is that right? Okay. And on the right, many people will know David Levy. On the left of the photograph, Dean, Rick Hill, is that right? And Gary Rosenbaum and Terry Lappin, who are here with us today. And I believe Rick Hill may also be here as well. There he is. Down below, more Teach AAA members. They used to fold newsletters, and there was a monthly newsletter folding. And before, in olden days, before everything became electronic. And so this, I believe, is the last manual newsletter folding. Gary and Terry, Ellen Finney, who's here today, Dean and Melinda, very much missed. Liz and John Kalis, who are here today, and Tom and Twyla Peck, who are in San Diego. And so Dean did a lot for the TAAA. Besides this, he was president of the TAAA. He won awards. His various awards, we have them on display outside in the lobby, not only from the TAAA, he got an award from the Astronomical Society of the Pacific and other awards as well. Lots and lots of people knew Dean, and Dean was loved by everyone. I never knew anybody that didn't like Dean. Next slide, please. And here are some of Dean's friends. I couldn't include everyone, but some of these people are in the room today. Jane up there, and Mike and Elvira Spooner, who are here today. Bernie Sandin, Donna Tippins couldn't be here today. And there's Dean and Donna and Susan Yeager. Is Susan here today? There's Susan. She wouldn't have missed, I know. And we have many other friends. I see Pat Stevenson up top, and I know there are many other friends. I couldn't include everyone. However, Pat Vega is here, and Dean worked as a sort of a resident astronomer at. She and her husband had an observatory, had a bed and breakfast observatory out in Benson, and he worked out there for many years. Ed and Pat Vega. And Dean had other kinds of friends too. Next slide. Furry friends. Furry friends, lots of furry friends. These are just a few of Dean's many, many, many furry friends. Scruffy and Annie and Atticus and others as well. And my own feeling about Dean is that, you know, he grew up as a farmer, and he became a shepherd, and he loved all his livestock. And many of us, cats and humans, we were rescued by Dean at difficult points in our lives, and we will be eternally grateful to our good shepherd, Dean Ketelsen. In conclusion, next slide. A bit about Dean's photography. Obviously, he was an amateur astronomer. He loved to photograph the Milky Way, panorama of the Milky Way from the Grand Canyon. Beautiful. If we turned off all the lights, even more beautiful. Next slide. And some of his nature photography, which we'll see more of in a moment in the slideshow. A famous photograph of stars rising over Kitt Peak, a dragonfly, I believe, a beautiful flower, a beautiful shot of a cactus flower. It looks like the flower is glowing and alive. And of course, Dean's sandhill cranes that are roost out at the Whitewater Draw, just west of the Chiricahua Mountains. And tomorrow, the family and friends and some other people, we're going out to the TAAA's Chiricahua Astronomy Complex, which is strategically located west of the Chiricahua Mountains, north of the Whitewater Draw, where the sandhill cranes are that Dean loves so much, and south of the Large Binocular Telescope, LBT, which Dean did so much to help bring into fruition. Last slide, please. And so we take leave of this extraordinary man, so kind and generous, so talented, packed to the rafters with activity and positive achievement, which I did not until recently completely appreciate just how active he was, because he made it seem so easy and so effortless. And I think that no one in this room, especially those who knew him well, will ever forget the traces and tracks that he left on our hearts. And so, goodbye. Goodbye, gentle friend Dean. We won't forget you.
Thank you, Roger. So we're planning on next, we have a presentation that Roger was able to put together along with our very own VJ. And I have a feeling that Miriam probably had a hand or two in that as well. So.
Yeah, sorry, there was supposed to be music, but a wonderful picture of Dean and Melinda. A wedding. Melinda at Rocky Point. Melinda with her sister Madge lighting up a Chinese lantern. Wonderful picture of Melinda and the colors in the back. That's very Dean. Melinda and her sister Madge and her sister Sharon. The cottage in St. Charles, Illinois that they had. Marriage. Melinda at Ebert Fest, Greenleaf Film Festivals. The last newsletter folder. The cats. At one point, he had 13 cats. Melinda, before she got sick, was a wonderful home restorer. She virtually rebuilt the cottage in St. Charles after she got sick with lung cancer. Melinda and Madge, her sister, the renovation of the bathroom. Melinda and a snowball in St. Charles. A great picture of Melinda. I see a marathon. Sunset and over. Mirror lab. Little circle laughing. Stars are moving. the slideshow quite yet. Scruffy the cat. I wish you could hear the music. Valerie, and now Dean's other telescope is an 8.4 meter. Lori Larson, doing his photography with Dean, the chair towers and the Bernice Hamden, Donna Tippins with Dean, selfies of course, this is a selfie. Flying with Chuck Schroll, Chuck was a pilot with Matt in the background. Donna Tippins and Susan Yeager. Oh! That's what I used to look like. Dick Booker and Peter Saravolo and Valerie Dean hosted some Russian kids. Could you stop this briefly? Go back to the Jane, who he rode tandem with at El Tour de Tucson sometimes. Dean hosted the gentleman on the right, Sergei Karpov, who brought a group of children from Siberia, I can't remember the name of their city, and they came to the Southwest, and they toured around. They went to Kidd Peak, they went to the Grand Canyon, they had a vast and wonderful time, and went back and I think this is maybe the second group. They came up in 2018 for a total solar eclipse in Wyoming, and Dean was so generous that he took them all, and he met a lady at the Grand Canyon Star Party who said, "Sure, bring them all up. We'll put them. They can camp in the front yard, the backyard." They had acreage, and they all set up, and they viewed the 2018 solar eclipse through telescopes. So you can imagine that for these kids, this was probably going to be one of the highlights of their life, to go to the United States, this very distant country, and with this wonderful, generous man, and with their teacher, a physics teacher, and tour around. Okay, go ahead. Dean with friends. Our friend Marilyn with a book dealer with Melinda. Bluebirds fly. Mike and Elvira Spooner, who are here today up on Mount Lebanon, or on the way to Mount Lebanon. Dave Esper and his wife. This is at Yerkes Observatory. Yep, there's Dean. There's the Dean we knew in recent years. On the streetcar. Where trouble melts like lemon drops high above the chimney top, that's where you find me, oh, somewhere over the rainbow, bluebirds fly. And the Dean took wonderful dream that you did to, oh why can't trees of green and red roses too. I watch them bloom for me and you, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Pollinator of the serious flower. Well, I see skies of blue, and I see clouds of white, and the brightness of day. I like the dark, and I think to myself, what a wonderful world. The colors of the rainbow, so pretty in the sky, are also on the faces of people passing by. I see friends shaking hands, singing, how do you do? They really say, I love you.
they'll learn much more than we'll know. And I think to myself, what a wonderful world. Someday I wish upon a star, wake up where the clouds are far behind. Be where trouble melts like a lemon drops high above the chimney top. That's where you find me, oh, somewhere over the rainbow, way up high. The dreams that you dare to, why, oh why can't I?
I shouldn't take all the credit for the slideshow. We have a very talented young man doing that. We call DJ. He has a heavy duty in me. And the wonderful young man, very bright, 18 years old, and he filed it all beautifully. And I read for the first time.
Thank you very much, Roger. And while we're thanking people just for this entire event, I want to go ahead and thank both Roger and Erica, who have been the organizing force for this entire event. And they have done an incredible job. Definitely deserve a round of applause. All right, so now we're going to move on into some individual speakers. And the first one will be Dean's sister, Linda.
Thank you. Some of what I'm going to say is going to be redundant, not knowing what Roger was going to speak of today, but thank you for coming today to honor my brother Dean. I'm his sister, Linda Ketelsen Story. Thank you to the Mirror Lab for letting us use their facilities and all that helped in the planning of this event, especially Roger and Erica again. Dean was very proud of the work he did here. He spoke often of the staff and the work he enjoyed so very, very much. Dean came from humble beginnings, born in Iowa, grew up on a farm with 5 siblings. We were very close. Family was very important to us. He asked for a telescope for Christmas in his early teens. The rest, as we say, is history. Many nights he would be out on our porch looking through his scope, trying to get us to see and learn all he was interested in. That wanting to share the night sky with others continued his whole life. I want to share one of Dean's blog entries with you, if I may, the ketelsen.blogspot.com, which Dean wrote. This was taken after the Grand Canyon 2019. Last week was the Grand Canyon Star Party. Next May will be the 30th anniversary of Vicki and me getting married in Vegas and honeymooning at the canyon for a couple of days. We discovered that most any optics setup at the rim would attract a crowd. So we started inviting friends to join us and setting up scopes for a week-long public star party. About the first thing we did was to move it to June when it was a little warmer, but has only grown in popularity. They now attract upwards of 2,000 people a night to more than 60 scopes. I now know what it is like to see your children grow up to do great things, as I feel this event is my offspring. I'm still the only one that has been to all of them, including the 0th one. and I hope to continue the streak. Let me see. One of the coolest events that happened during the week, 2019 marked the 100th anniversary of the Grand Canyon as a national park, was the bestowing of dark sky park status to the Grand Canyon by the International Dark Sky Association, IDA. Over the last few years, the Grand Canyon Conservancy has done a full census of lighting in the park and retrofitted over 5,000 lights to dark sky friendly. I'm thinking that our little event helped motivate the National Park Service into recognizing that dark skies are a resource and worthy of protecting. Well, that is it for another year. Always fun to get people excited about what they can see through a telescope. Next year's events will be held the 13th through the 20th of June. This was written 4 years ago. So mark your calendars now and I'll see you there. I can't say it, and you can't say I didn't give you enough warning to make plans. And the Grand Canyon Star Party for 2024 is June 1st through June 8th. Dean's first wife, Vicki, lost her fight with cancer in 2003. 5 years later, he married Melinda. She also died from cancer in 2016. They were the light of his life. He fought their fight right along with them to the end. What could have made him bitter never did. He learned to embrace life and to just keep going on. I'd like to quote the words of Job chapter 1, verse 21. The Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. We were all shocked to hear of Dean's passing on August 9th. While out mowing in St. Charles, Illinois, he had what we think is an apparent heart attack. We lost our big brother. You lost a good friend. I never got a chance to tell him how much he meant to me and how much we all loved him. I hope he knew. I want you all to know how much you meant to Dean. You all were like his Tucson family to him. He truly valued your friendship more than you'll ever know. In closing, I'd like to say I'm thankful for the lessons I've learned from my brother Dean. Love life. Love your family and your friends and tell them how you feel about them. Appreciate the beautiful world and heavens God has given us, and appreciate each day that we have on this earth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. Big Brother Dean, that sounds like a good title. The Shepherd. It's quite the theme. All right, next up, we're going to have Dr. Buddy Martin. He's a polishing scientist, been leading polishing at the Mirror Lab for the past 30 years. Here we go.
Thanks. Oh, I learned so much from Roger's presentation. I know Dean from the Mirror Lab, and I knew about I knew he was involved in so many things, but I had no idea the breadth of his activities and knowledge and expertise. So that was great, Roger. Thanks. Yeah. So I had the privilege to work with Dean for 33 years at the Mirror Lab, starting in 1980. He had come to the university's Optical Science Center in 1984. OSC had just acquired the Large Optical Generator, or LOG, and Dean became the LOG operator. He knew all about grinding and polishing mirrors from his experience as an amateur telescope maker, and now he had this opportunity to do it on a huge scale. Well, huge brings in its own complications, and Dean came to master those, but he always had that fundamental understanding of what happens between the tool and the glass that's so valuable and served us so well for the decades that he worked with us. 1984 was also about the time the university started building the Mirror Lab. And by 1990, it had grown to have a big lab for grinding and polishing 8-meter mirrors. So we were able to transfer the log from OSC to the mirror lab, and Dean came with it. So that's when I learned what a pleasure it was to work with Dean. Dean had two characteristics that made him so easy to work with. First, he knew all the things that I don't know about making optics. And second, he had no personal agenda. He might have his way of doing something, but he didn't care whether we did it his way or my way. He'd work with equal enthusiasm either way. And if we wound up doing it my way, he made it work better. Dean was our go-to man for oddball optics, for unplanned, out of the ordinary things to do with glass. There've been a few times where we had to repair a flaw by grinding out glass, and we wanted to fill in the hole. So Dean figured out how to make glass balls anywhere from 1/2 inch diameter to, well, I can't say how big some of them were, and slice them in half and lap them into a mirror so smoothly that you could hardly tell there was a repair that had been made. And, you know, he had fun with that. And fortunately for us, he was also extremely good at it. I think Dean, yeah, great. That is what I want. Thanks. I think Dean felt lucky to be able to work on big, unique mirrors. And he shared this experience through talks and his blog. He was able to share a lot of positive, great stuff that we at the Mirror Lab and Stewart Observatory were proud of. But he didn't mind sharing challenges, things that maybe we weren't so proud of, but that were interesting to him. I don't think Dean thought much about what is or isn't appropriate to share. He didn't care about the optics in that PR sense. He was just open and enthusiastic, and what he cared about was what was it that people would find interesting. So one experience that stands out to me, next slide, please, was for the way it captures Dean's playful nature and the fun he had with his work, but also captures his ability to not worry about PR, is this. In 1997, when we had just finished, or we were just finishing our first 6.5 meter mirror for the MMT, Dean had the idea of making a heat angel by lying on the mirror and warming the surface with his body. Well, our glass, like most things, expands when you heat it up. And so this made a bump on the surface that showed Dean's outline, like the snow angel, but in reverse. So I'm sure this was an experiment, and Dean didn't know exactly how it was going to work out. But he did it, and then he got off the mirror and quickly measured the surface with the interferometer and got this beautiful result where most of the surface is smooth to 20 nanometers, and there's a 500 nanometer bump in the shape of Dean. Yeah. Well, I don't know how many people saw this at the time, but Dean sure had fun with this, and I'm pretty sure he shared it with a lot of people. And I don't remember exactly what I saw or knew about it at the time. I mean, this was 27 years ago. But I'll bet there were a few people at Stewart Observatory who weren't thrilled to see it. And the reason is that the reason the heat angel works so well is that our glass is more sensitive to temperature than some other mirror materials. And it's one of the few things that we don't brag about. We don't go out of our way to advertise. And this, this beautiful experiment was an advertisement of how sensitive the mirror is to temperature. Well, Dean was pretty much oblivious to that kind of thinking. He thought of it as a cool thing to do. He pulled it off really well, and he wanted to share it because it was fun and interesting. And that's great, because we're all better off when people find some fun in their work. Dean was a wonderful model of that, and I hope I can keep that part of Dean in me for the rest of my life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, buddy. I'm seeing most of the polishing crew back there. That's probably something we don't need to be trying again. It's already been done. It's not cool anymore. All right. Up next, we have Jim O'Connor from the Grand Canyon Star Party.
Well, thank you, everybody, for being here. And I wanted to get on the agenda just because I want to tell about the biggest lesson probably I've learned in my life, maybe, that Dean taught me about using the Grand Canyon. In 2003, my wife Susan and I went to our first Grand Canyon Star Party. We thought we'd see what one was like. After one night there, we said, we're coming here forever. And so the next year and 5 more years, we were going up there, and I was telling Dean what a wonderful resource he had given to the world of this being able to not only on our own investigate the night sky, but to be able to share it with so many people. You heard about the 2,000 number up there a night. Some of you have done 40-person star parties at schools. Can you think what that meant with the Mongol horde that came over the horizon at sundown? Well, I told him this, and I was blathering on about how great it was to deal with all the people and open their minds on their home universe. And he said, "You want to do it?" Dean was a person of few words. And I kind of joked about it. And I said, "Why? It's going so well already." He said that he was thinking of backing off, and it was time to him to go on to doing greater work. And so that was in 2008. I said, "Let me think about it." The next day I came back and said, "Yeah, I'd like to do it. I don't want to see this ever get harmed." And never heard again. Until spring of 2009, when Dean invited several of us from the club, or anybody from the club who was interested in GCSP and the way we were going to go forward. So I showed up at the pizza party, and he was talking about, well, what do we do now? And I said, "Well, for the last year, I've been telling you I would take over." "Oh, I didn't think you were serious." And I said, "No, I'd love to do it." From that point forward, he was the calmest, wisest mentor I could have ever hoped for in getting the information on it. So I shadowed him in 2009 and 2010, all proud of myself, went and stepped in and thought, I got this handled, this is good. 2011, I got an email from an electrical engineering student in Ankara, Turkey. He had a Celestron 11-inch telescope and wanted to come to the Grand Canyon Star Party. He'd been coming his whole life. But he was a grad student, so he's living in the dormitory. And if he was out of the room for more than 2 days, they would give his room away. And so he asked about, is there any way you can make it work for me? And so that was an email, so I could ignore it. It wasn't on a phone call. I called Dean, or I sent an email to Dean and said, what now? And he said, "So write him a letter and I'll sign it." And that's where he made up a job title. Back at that time, we were called the coordinator of the Grand Canyon Star Party South Rim. He called himself Coordinator Emeritus. And so I scribbled out about 4 paragraphs about why we needed this student. And He signed it. I got it on Overseas Express over to him, and he got it 4 days later. And he started to push the process on his side. Well, he didn't make it that year to the Grand Canyon Star Party because of administrative falderall and diplomatic things. So by the next year, we still had that letter, and he was trying again. But he didn't. He had graduated, but he didn't get a job because he wanted to come to the Star Party. Because he was a graduate student with high-tech equipment he wanted to bring to the US to a big group gathering, and he didn't have a job or connections back in Turkey, and nobody knew him here, the State Department declined his visa 5 times. After that, he never got to make his trip over here. But Dean, in 15 minutes, when I was having a heart attack about how was I going to help this guy, just says, write a letter, I'll sign it. And that was typical of everything up until even including this past year at the 2023 event. I was setting up my telescope. He was setting up near me. And I said hi. We talked a little bit. And I mentioned something that was going on. And he gave me another wise suggestion. But from that time, from 2009 through 2023, he always gave me a 3 to 5 word sentence that calmed the problems that had me somehow tying myself up into the ceiling. And that's what I learned from him. When things got tough and I was really anxious over something, I just imaged Dean. I just channeled Dean, and all of a sudden became simple. And that's the thing I appreciate the most about it. I've got a couple of other friends from that association, like Marilyn Unruh and Dean. Dean Barry Sandin, thinking about Dean. They were my other kind of sources to go to, but Dean was always the wise whisperer who just said, well, just do this. And so then I would sleep at night. So Dean taught me that great lesson. And he did the Grand Canyon Star Party for 19 years. For health reasons, I only was able to do it for 13 into 14 years. And now Jim Knoll is doing fantastic behind me. And but Dean was still the master. To have that insight, to have, I thought the greatest thing was having Grand Canyon Star Party 0, because he still knew that he would always have one more year of attendance than anybody else, no matter who he brought there. And through him, I learned about Bob and Valerie, and met Valerie, and it was a fantastic experience. But to know these people through Dean, it was just an unforgettable experience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, next, continuing with along the theme of the Grand Canyon Star Party, we have Bernie Sandin.
I'm Bernie Sandin, if you don't know me. And if you know me, I'm still Bernie Sandin. Somewhere in here, I have some stuff to read, because otherwise I will babble. Don't be afraid. It's not really that much. Yeah, so I started coming to the Grand Canyon Star Party in 1994. 1994, think about that. That was like 30 years ago. And 30 years ago, it had only been going for 3 years, 4 if you count year 0. So, and Dean, you're right. Dean used to always tell me that I'll never catch up to him. In fact, I may stop in 2 or 3 years so I don't pass him, just to honor him. I'm honoring him right now with a shirt. We had about 20 of these in the 30 years that I've got. And I think some of them I've got twice because I know I'll wear them all out. All right, I'm already babbling. So let me just tell you the reason I came up here. I knew there was going to be a lot of talk about the Grand Canyon Star Party, so I don't need to tell you all that stuff. And yeah, there was a lot of personal things. I used to go up there myself in May after I would graduate from, not graduate, but get through my schooling. I'd go up in May and I'd take something up there and I'd get a crowd sort of like Dean had. And I kept doing that every Memorial Day, right around my birthday. And actually a friend of mine, Tom Palakis, told me, we're going to the RTMC, the Riverside Telescope Makers Conference, and why don't you go talk to Dean? Because he does this thing in June. So I went to see Dean and I said, Dean, I'd like to come to this star party thing because I'm doing my own thing and it's cold in May and you're doing it in June. And he just said, all right, just show up. All right, so I did. So I showed up. And it took me a couple of years to really get to know Dean. So I probably only know Dean really well for about 28 years. But the interesting thing about that is I only saw him maybe 3 or 4 times a year. He's sort of like a really close brother or friend that you get to see maybe once a year. And the Grand Canyon Star Party to me was more like a family get together. It really was close. I mean, there's people here that I know that we went every year for years and years, and it was like a reunion. We'd all get together, but we had a purpose. The purpose was to show the sky to the visitors at the Grand Canyon. And yes, Dean had everything in the world to do with that. And yes, John Dobson had done some stuff before, but John got upset with the National Park Service. And I think it might have been Dean. I don't know the story, but I think it might have been Dean that pulled him back in, because for several years after that, John would give a talk. We were all giving talks back then. It was windy and cold up at the Yavapai Observing Center. And we would give talks. And John was great. John was, again, making the Dobsonian telescope named after himself, which I started to make. I'd made 3 of them. And it revolutionized everything for me and for a lot of other people. But the point I'm getting at, if I get to a point here, is that I want to talk about his influence. And I'm just going to talk about his influence with respect to the Grand Canyon Star Party. You've all heard all the other things. But last year, the visitor contacts was in the neighborhood of 80,000. So think about that, 80,000 views through telescopes last year at the Grand Canyon Star Party. Now multiply that by not necessarily 30 years, because it never was as big as it is now, but it's probably been pretty close to that for the last 15 years. So you think 80 to 100,000 people every year, not necessarily people, but views through the scope. So maybe divide that by 5, the number of people, something like that. But these are the number of people that look through the scope. And I don't know about anybody else, but I've had people cry at the telescope when the first time they'd seen Saturn. I mean, it's pretty amazing. And you're having that kind of influence over people. And again, all you're doing is you're just setting the telescope down and showing them stuff that you love to do. And you're changing lives. And I mean, I could go on and on about the lives that I've seen changed. So figure some small percentage of those 80,000 views and those maybe 20,000 people, and just think about what some percentage of those people are going to, for the rest of their lives, they're going to change because of what they saw, because it happened to me the same way. And so there's some of the influence that he had. But then think about the International Dark Sky Association, where they just, and Raider Lane had a lot to do with that. Getting that, and Raider's the ranger up there that's now the interpretive ranger helping us with the Star Party. Before that, it was Marker Marshall. And the very first one, of course, was Chuck Waller. And they all have been extremely influential and helpful to keeping this alive at the Grand Canyon. But these kind of things happen because we end up putting something together that started to become very, very important to the National Park Service. In fact, I think right now it's the biggest star party in any national park. And I bet you there wouldn't be hardly any in the national park if it wasn't for the fact that Dean started this one at the Grand Canyon. So anyways, there's some statistics for you. I could keep going on and on, but there's usually about 50 to 75 telescopes at a time every night up there for the 8 nights. And Raider somehow lassoed some of us into doing some off-season Grand Canyon Star Party stuff. It won't be anywhere near the same scale, but it's got so much, I don't know, I guess it's just so important. It's so helpful for the people to see this that we want to extend it beyond 1 week in the Grand Canyon. And I'm all for that. I think that's a great thing to do. So the only other reason I'm up here, well, I should say one more thing, because I meant to say this. think about when the old, everybody's heard this old stereotype thing about sticking, throwing a rock into a lake and then there's ripples. And think of everything that Dean's done in terms of a ripple, and those ripples go on forever. Now take like a dump truck's worth of pebbles and throw those into a lake. That's Dean. All right. All right. So I was asked to read a letter. Now you all saw that picture. Dean several times had sponsored a group of Russian children to America and showed them this mirror lab, showed them, national parks and all the astronomy stuff, probably a lot of things that I don't even know. But the point is, one of those students, the first time, and I can't remember the year, but it probably was somewhere around 2009, came back, and that was Sergey. He was the one that was far right on your screen. I'm backwards, so it's far right on your screen. He came with them. At that point, he was already a teacher, and he was so excited for the first time he came, he brought 12 or 11 students with him. So there was a group of 12. I got to meet them all in 2017 at the solar eclipse in Shoshone, Wyoming, where they were staying. And I know Ren was there, and Christoph, and a few other people. Donna Tippins was there. But the point is, he really was as hurt as the rest of us when we heard the news. And so he wrote this kind of with the intent of trying to petition him to have an asteroid named after him, or a minor what do you call him, minor planet named after him. What he didn't know is it's already happened. Dave Healy gave him one in 2001. So, but nonetheless, the letter was, he was asking to read it, and because I don't do very well without glasses, give me a couple of seconds. I forgot that I still can't read without these glasses. So this is from Sergei Karpov. And you're right, I can't read this either. It's Krasnoyarsk, Russia, and Siberia. Yeah, it's in Siberia. I looked it up. It's amazing. It's north of Mongolia. Isn't that something? But all right, so let me just read this. I don't want to. All right, so it says the epoch of Dean Ketelsen, the great American. I was away for only 1 week, participating in a star party away from civilization, and only after returning, I read this terrible news. I still can't get over it. Every day, I recall the image of Dean as I remembered him during our visits to the USA with groups of children from the Junior Astronomy Club. What attentive attitude Dean showed to Russian children, presenting them with gifts. What anxiety for the implementation of the planned program! Exclamation. What interesting and informative tours he organized, starting, of course, with the Holy of Holies, the Mirror Lab at the University of Arizona, his main place of work, and then continuing with visits to the legendary astronomical observatories of Arizona, and how impressed participants were with the Grand Canyon and the road trip across half of America from Los Angeles to Wyoming to observe the 2017 total solar eclipse. It was a very interesting experiment during the 2012 visit. Well, there you go. When 11 Russian children were placed for a few lessons in an American school at a school in Tucson, and how amusing it was to see how the Russian and American children interacted. And it was all thanks to Dean. I am absolutely sure that none of the children who participated in trips into the USA since 1998, despite the efforts of short-sighted politicians, will never think badly about America or Americans, kind and sympathetic people, very much like Russians in this. For me, America is Dean. Man, I'm choking up. Sorry, guys. I regret that I have very rarely communicated with Dean lately, literally once or twice. The last time we exchanged emails on Christmas Eve 2022, Dean said he was currently driving on his way to Chicago. Dean said each time that he was feeling very good, and the main demotivating event in his life was the passing of his wife, Melinda. And we all feel that way. A wonderful woman who who as a medic brought him back to life the last time he was in the hospital with pneumonia. This was before they were even married. I recall our first visit to the USA in 1998 when Dean, a 12-year-old amateur astronomy enthusiast, and I were given the opportunity to make presentations at the Tucson Amateur Astronomical Association, meeting at Dean's initiative. What a thrill it was, but what a success. We were immediately taken from our like-minded friends. After an extensive tour program, we were flown by plane to San Francisco, where we were met by the sidewalk astronomers and the famous John Dobson. And later, our acquaintance with the sidewalk astronomers of Los Angeles took place, where we returned from San Francisco. Here, we had a new contract with this organization, through which a great new project was realized. Its main organizer was Donna Smith, and it was thanks to her participation that the project of John Dobson's visits to Russia was realized. There were 2 such visits to many cities in Russia. John was delighted with the work of the children's astronomy clubs in Russia. And what is very important, these visits became triggers for the rapid development of sidewalk astronomy in Russia, which no one knew about before John's visit. Well, there's another one of those drops in the pond, right? I mean, just incredible. So how many unfinished plans Dean had left? Yeah, don't we know? His small observatory in the backyard of his house in Tucson, preparations for observing a total solar eclipse in the summer of 2024, and many more. Perhaps we too would have participated in the 2024 event. So the last thing is just about how he really should have a minor planet, and he does, and I actually wrote it down, 124075 Ketelsen on April 15, 2001. Okay, I'm probably over my time, but I just wanted to read that. And I mean, we all appreciate it. I tell you, when I heard the news, it was like a baseball bat to the gut. It was like losing somebody that you can't believe. Even today, it's hard to believe. I'll go up to the Grand Canyon next summer and he won't be there. It's just going to be unreal. But, you know, I mean, we're all in here for the same reason. We don't have words to describe how it feels, but we came anyways and did the best we could. So thank you for the time.
Thank you very much. All right, next we have John Callis. He's a former president of the TAAA.
Hi, my name is John Callis. I'm a former president of the club, Tucson Amateur Astronomy Association. And my wife and I joined the organization in 1994, 29 years ago, and we were fortunate enough to have Dean as the president at that time. And so we got to familiarize ourselves with Dean, get friendly with him, and get active in a brand new club with a leader that was exceptional. Okay, next slide. Dean was an outstanding telescope maker and optician, as we've already heard. Here he's showing a future president of the club, Andrew Cooper, one of his latest creations. And this is at the Starbecues that we used to hold at Kitt Peak, which he had arranged for, because he had a lot of pull with the University of Arizona and Kitt Peak since he worked there so many years. He was able to get us permission to go up and have these barbecues followed by stargazing. So it was really a great setup that we had. Next slide. Okay, this is a shot at the Riverside Telescope Makers Conference. I believe this was May of 2001. And it shows the Tucson contingent, the group of people who went to a multi-day activity and conference over the Memorial Day weekend. And you can see Dean there in the center and Rogers standing right next to him And we're all standing in front of Roger's submission, his telescope that he designed and built and submitted to the conference for consideration. Okay, next slide. This is a group shot at the club's 50th anniversary. We had a really nice banquet and invited all of the living past presidents to attend. And one of the activities was to get a group picture. And we have all of the past presidents who were attending at that time. Okay, next. We just didn't interact with our fellow members of the club at astronomy functions, although obviously we did a lot of group activities related to astronomy. But every once in a while, we'd get out on the town, and Dean was famous for promoting and trying to get folks to go and go out and have a good time. Here we attended a baseball game. Actually, it was the Diamondbacks and the San Francisco Giants. And in this shot, we have past President Tom Peck with his wife Twyla at the end, Jane Tongate, who we've seen numerous references to today, Dean, and my wife Liz. And at this particular game, we witnessed Barry Bonds hitting his 699th home run. So it was kind of a cool adder. Next slide. This is another shot from the Kitt Peak Starbecue. This is one of Dean's favorite telescopes that he used. And the Jane is in the background in the green sweatshirt back there, and my wife. And of course, Melinda is there as well. And at this point, she was the soon-to-be Mrs. Ketelsen. And the interesting thing about this, if you look at the level of dress of everyone else in this picture except Dean, there's a marked difference, and he was very well insulated. Next. This shot, we've seen a little different shot here, but this is at our west side observing site, our Timpa site, where we had the opportunity to celebrate Dean and Melinda's local wedding celebration and reception. So we had a lot of members out, and we just had a great time. They're a fabulous couple, and just great fun. Next slide. This one we've seen this exact picture. This is a newsletter folding at the Mirror Lab conference room, and we were very, very grateful that Dean was able to arrange to have us use these facilities. So this is great fun. After every one of these monthly activities, we all went out to a restaurant, local restaurant, and just kept the party going. Next one, please. Okay, this is up on Kitt Peak as well. This is public, and Dean was very, very adamant about outreach. He shared, as you've heard at the Grand Canyon Star Party, his outreach and sharing is paramount to him. Well, this was a Meteor Mania event that was scheduled by Kitt Peak for the public, and I believe it was for the Orionids. But anyway, what I'm showing here is that this was in October, and as I recall, it was really cold. And you can obviously notice that Dean did adjust for the cool weather by changing his short sleeve t-shirt to a long sleeve t-shirt. The guy was incredible. He used to observe all winter long in shorts. Everyone else is bundled up like Nanuka, the North, and he's just having a gay old time. Next slide. Here's a birthday celebration that Dean and Melinda invited my wife and I to, and this was at their favorite local restaurant, Old Chicago. A lot of folks in this room probably remember Old Chicago. We went there many, many times for all kinds of activities and fun times. Next one, please. Okay, I'm going to end with this quote. I hope. Why don't you read the quote and I'll comment it. This was Dean's words. I took it from a booklet that we had at the 50th anniversary where all the presidents had comments and a little summary of their activities and their terms in president, their accomplishments. And I thought this was very, very appropriate. And it says a lot about Dean's philosophy and his demeanor. Okay. I feel very privileged to be able to speak on Dean's behalf, and I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. All right, so this time we've had our planned speakers. So now we are going to open up the floor. If there's anybody who would like to share, you can either come down here or you can share from where you are. Either way. Looks like we have number one. Here we go. There you go. Excuse me. One thing I just do ask is that just go ahead and introduce yourself to everybody. There we go from there.
I'm Bill Lofquist and was president of the association from 2005 to 7, I think it was, but was a board member for eons. I'm going to tell a brief story about Dean, and I apologize for my voice. It's gotten a little bit older since I stood down here. But this illustrates how generous Dean was with his time, his ideas, his creativity. It's a story about an event that Dean created and on a number of occasions took us in the club up to Mount Lemmon to experience what he had created. It was an event where we could take pictures in an absolutely remarkable way. And one of the pictures was illustrated in the series of his photography, and you'll recognize it when I get to that part of the story. I've told this story to dozens and dozens of people and will continue because it was so creative. Dean figured out that you could go up Mount Lemmon to mile marker between 108 or between 8 and 9 on the Mount Lemmon Highway, and twice a year, 2 days before the winter solstice and 2 days after the winter solstice, when the tilt of the earth was just right. And this, to me, illustrated that Dean had a very clear sense of his place in the universe. And if I took my 8-inch Celestron telescope and put my camera on the back of it And while we, a small group of us, were there, parked next to the Mount Lemmon Highway, could take a picture of the sun setting behind Kitt Peak, which was about 70 miles away. And we could make a slideshow of the sun setting behind Kitt Peak. And as it got behind the mountain, you could begin to see the silhouettes of the telescopes on the top of of Kitt Peak, all the way through until the sun disappeared. To me, I could not imagine how in the world Dean had ever figured that out. And this past summer, he was visiting with us, and Mary and I had a chance to visit with Dean about an hour. And I asked him, how in the world did you come up with that? And he explained it to me, but I still don't understand it because it required such an incredible imagination. And I don't know how many trips up there he experimented with that. But each year, I was up there for 3 years taking these pictures. And others in the club, I know there's some here that had the opportunity to do the same thing. But anyway, to me, this is a story of incredible imagination. And I'll continue to tell that because people are so amazed about it when I tell it to them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yep. Would you like to come down or?
Thank you so much. I met Dean in 1994. My name is Lori Larson, and he was so great up at Kitt Peak with all the tours. Everybody's eyes would light up. He's, like we said before, the ripples. But I'm going to just share one quick story about the first time the Russian astronomers came around. Dean started getting all these emails and he thought it was spam. And he's like, Lori, should I even answer these? I'm like, well, yeah. And so who would do that? So it's a complete email from somebody who would do this. Okay. And they came out and then he was like, I didn't think they would come out. Lori, what are we going to do? I'm like, well, let's just, give him the first tour. So we did. And there was a language barrier at first. We were driving all around and then we thought, let's take him to the Grand Canyon too. And, we drive by the restroom. Do you need to go to the restroom? And they go, no. How about the bathroom? No. And they thought that really mean rest, sleep, in bathroom, taking a bath. But so we had some issues like that. And the fact that they needed soup at every meal was kind of a challenge. But so we soup for breakfast. So we get to the Grand Canyon. And he has this idea, just like we're talking about the creative idea that Dean has. Let's blindfold them, and walked him to the edge. So we did that. The Sergey was just very stoic, like you would imagine. And then the kids, we walk to the edge, they take their blindfold off. And Sergey goes, oh, and he collapses to the ground and he starts crying. And I've never seen a grown man cry. And he said, I was taught my whole life up here in Siberia that you Americans are terrible people. This is the most magical. You have been better to me than people in my own country. And to me, that's who Dean is. He's an astronomer for world peace. And on a personal note, I moved out to Rodeo, New Mexico, which is in the boonies in the middle of nowhere. And Susan and Dean came out a few months ago and they're like, this is way too far out for you. You need to start checking in with me. Just check in with an email and that's it. So he cares about everyone on a personal level. And then what he did for the astronomers. Thank you very much.
Thank you. No problem. I just didn't wash my feet.
My name is Rick Hill. Some of you know me. been with the Astronomy Club since 1979. In 1979, Sky and Telescope had an advertisement for a job on Kitt Peak. And they had various requirements for the job, and none of them included a degree, which was great for me. Because I didn't have one yet. I was still working on it. And my wife encouraged me to apply for the job, and I did. And they had 250 applicants to Case Western Reserve University to run the Warner and Swayze Observatory on Kitt Peak, which is the Burl Schmidt telescope, the blue one. You might remember it as the blue one. And it turns out among those 250 applicants was also Dean Ketelsen. And Dean got the job first, but Case was very slow to respond to him. And so he got frustrated. He went and he got a job with Kitt Peak directly. And the job went to the number 2 guy. Sometimes being runner-up ain't so bad. But Dean and I had another connection, and we love to talk about. We're both cat rescuers. Dean had me beat. Since we've been married, we've had 25 of them. I think he had 25 at one time. I was always impressed with how he was able to just do the cat boxes every day, let alone feed them, and who took care of them when he was away. That's quite a job. You took care of them when he, yeah. Did he have 25 at one time? Oh, definitely in the teens, definitely. We had 10 2 years ago, and we've had 5 deaths since. And yeah, natural causes, old age, cancers, things like that. So we always met on that ground, and that usually we both knew we were both opticians. I was an optician in Michigan. He was an optician here. We were both astronomers. We started out that way, but the conversation always wound up with cats. So that's how I remember him, and will always remember him. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Lady, okay. Okay, I see we got 3 here, so we're gonna go right here first.
Thank you. Okay, my name is Nancy Buchanan, and Vicky, Dean's first wife, was one of my best friends. Oh, sorry. My name is Nancy Buchanan, and Dean's first wife, Vicky, was one of my best friends. So I really don't have anything to say about telescopes or anything, but anyway, I first met Dean when he started dating Vicky. She was part of a group of my best friends who celebrated birthdays with a girls-only lunch get together, which not infrequently involved complaining about men in general. But we were so amazed and impressed with how lovingly Dean took care of Vicky during her battle with cancer that after she passed away, we invited him to join our group. He often brought his famous chocolate cheesecake. Dean was so pleased to be included that he referred to himself as an honorary girl. To this day, if we find ourselves railing against the hopelessness of men, someone in our group will say, but then there's Dean. Okay.
One more and then you'll be next. Just not yet, not yet. Roger?
Oh, yeah, hi. I'm Roger Angel, one of the professors here. And one thing that struck me listening to the talk, particularly about the Grand Canyon Star Party, that is over a year here, we teach, I don't know how many people, some hundreds of undergraduates about the wonders of astronomy. And I think Dean, through the Grand Canyon Party, has inspired thousands of people every year about the wonders of astronomy. And that is quite remarkable. I think, you know, humans over since the time of Galileo, and Newton, and so on, have been inspired by the heavens. But to bring so many thousands of people to see the heavens, I think it is a wonderful thing that he's led. I wanted to just say one or two words. I worked very closely with Dean in the past year, and we've had a new project here. We make the 8-meter mirrors, and they cost something like $1,000 per square inch of mirror. And there's only so many square inches. And if you think you can raise $1 billion or $2 billion, you can make so many square inches of mirror. But if you want some of the most attractive ways to look for life on other planets and the signatures of life, you need more area than we can buy with $1 billion if it's $1,000 a square meter. So we've been looking at ways to make mirrors at $100 or less per square meter. And who better for that than Dean? So Dean came to our new project, which I call Mirror Lab 2, to figure out how we could make mirrors as cheap. And we figured out that going from 8 meters to 0.8 meters, 10 times smaller, would allow us to do that. So right up until in June, I was working very closely with Dean on how to, adapt the techniques that he knew so well, not only for big mirrors, but for little mirrors. And it was devastating when he died. But one thing he did very well was to document exactly what he was doing. And so I was able to go from his emails right up to June, and he explained concisely and clearly just what he was doing and what mixture of polish you put to make the mirrors go correctly and how long. So it's been a tragic loss, but I'm grateful to have worked so closely with him, especially recently, where he was still very energetic and accomplished in doing this work. So thank you, Dean.
So Dean had a collection of Susans in his life, and I was Susan from Yorkville in Illinois. And so Dean would come to St. Charles, which was near Yorkville, and he'd let me know he was on his way. And so in the fall, Northwestern University Sierra astronomy department, they put on a big lecture, and they got a big name to come in. They were going to be having Ray Weiss from LIGO detector fame. He had just won the Nobel Prize, and they were going to have him speak. And I said to Dean, do you want to go? I'm going, I'll drive you. And he's like, okay, So we get up to Northwestern, we find parking, and we're coming into a room kind of like this, but we were early. And so we came down the side, and Ray Weiss was just standing all by himself at the bottom. Like, what? And so I said, Dean, we got to go down and meet him. And he's like, what? And I said, come on, let's just go meet him. We'll pretend that we're important. So we go down there, and just as we're approaching Ray, Vicky Caligera, who runs Sierra, I knew her, and she was coming through the doors, and she saw me. So she starts going, Susan. And so Ray Weiss hears this, and he's thinking, oh, she must be important. So Ray Weiss starts to walk towards me going, hi, I'm Ray Weiss. And I'm like, oh, hi, I'm like nobody, but it's great to meet you, Nobel Prize winner. And so I was chatting, just a couple words with him. And I said, oh, you have to meet Dean Ketelsen. And he's like, oh, hello. I said, Dean works on the GMT. He's a big, guy at the lab, and he knows how to polish these big mirrors. And Ray was you should have seen Ray Weiss's face. He was like, so he starts talking to Dean, and I just went and sat down. But Dean comes to sit down next to me. He goes, why did you do that to me? And I said, because you're really important and you're really smart, So he was like a big brother to me, and I really miss him.
Jack, much better than I can. There you go.
I don't know how many years on Kitt Peak with Dean. And
Can I
you want me
hold
to-
this because
Sure.
the people on Zoom can.
Sure. So he was only 1 year older, but he was so much like my big brother. And I was a tour guide. I had a BS in astronomy, but without the physics. So I was kind of incidental to him. But over time, he came to appreciate that I could contribute to the spreading of the gospel, as it were, in astronomy, in science, in life, in compassion, in all things. I mean, he was so much more than an optician. And I saw that early on. And I'm so blessed that I don't know how many of you had this, but I had so many hours of heartfelt conversations with Dean about life and love and family. And I know only one person in his family, probably doesn't remember me, but Dean and I had this interesting dance of respect and playfulness all at the same time. Let me just see what I wrote down because well, the point is, as you've all spoken, he had a kindness, a generosity, he shared, and he cared. He cared about family, friends, creatures, and creation. He was so more multidimensional than many people actually knew. And I had the luxury of drinking beer with him and having long phone conversations and many hundreds of nights on Kitt Peak of walking the trails and away from the telescopes, away from the science. We actually had boy to boy, man to man talks for quite a long time. And I got to really know who he was. I saw his compassion early on, but he became a friend. He went from me being sort of a minion to a mutual respect. And that was a great gift that he gave to me, because as a tour guide, you're just sort of considered auxiliary and incidental. But he came to see that I was connected in the same way that he was. I didn't have his science, I didn't have his accomplishments, but we became very, very dear friends. And the part that many of you may not know was Dean and I played golf together. And you did not know Dean until you were on the golf course with him. Never said an unkind word to anybody, was always balanced, compassionate, and kind. But on the golf course, it was the only thing I think in his whole life that he could never master. Not that anybody can. It's like chess, guitar, any number of other things. You cannot master that game. But the beauty of Dean was that he played golf in all this great frustration and still did it with joy and compassion without having to master it. And considering all of his accomplishments, I thought that was a great character that I was really amazed by. Because you look at me, my brother used to tell me, how you play golf is how you are in life. And how you play that out on the golf course, which is very difficult, very frustrating, is how you project in the rest of your life. Dean went out there, had a couple of beers, laughed and said, hit a terrible shot most of the time, and then said, okay, let's keep going. And so I saw this other dimension of Dean that I was really awed by. And in the 80s, he gave me this iron meteorite, and I had to write this down because I'd forgotten it, but he said, and Dean was not philosophical. He was heartfelt, he was genuine, but he didn't often go into that other realm. But when he handed this to me, he said, we are the universe and the universe is us. And I went, wow. And Bob and Val, and Rick Hill, we spent many, many nights up there together. And when you're on a mountaintop with a handful of people, you open yourself to other dimensions other thoughts, other feelings, and all kinds of things that you don't normally do. And I was very, very privileged to have Dean share so many things with me that he was not prone to do in general. And we became brothers, and I was very honored by that.
I see anybody else? I see.
Drew's got something for you.
Okay, they want you to use this so you can hear on Zoom. And then we got you back.
So I met your brother 20 years ago. And I'm one of, there's about 15 of us here that are technicians that we worked with Dean right with him. Besides all the technology and science and engineering that goes into these mirrors, you actually have to physically interact with them. And when you do that, you spend lots of hours with one another. And he was always there. And at first, when I first started working there, I was really intimidated by Dean. I mean, Dean was stronger than any one of us. But his knowledge and his skills were, well, they were second to none. And I remember a few years into the game, I was working with a guy that had to go on vacation for 3 weeks. And so I was the point guy in this other mirror. And I didn't want to get a visit by Buddy if the mirror went in the wrong direction. So I thought, well, I'll go talk to Dean because he's the man. And he simply sat down with me for hours and we went over strategies and so on and so forth. And that was a relationship that lasted this whole time, not only me, but everybody else. Anybody that wanted his experience or knowledge, he took the time to show him. And then I think it was maybe 5 years ago, I was sitting there once again with a run design. I wanted Dean to look over at it. And he did. And I said, hey, Dean, what do you think? And he just looked at me and he said, I think it's your turn, Kevin. And I was like, my turn for what? He said, it's your turn to show other people what you know. You're ready. And so I could say that to everybody in this room, myself included. Find the time to show others what you know. And that's what Dean did.
My name is Pat Stevenson. I work for Dean at the Mirror Lab as a technician. I went to him after spending 30 years in the Army. No optical experience, whatever. And for those of you guys that worked around me, the early days when I got there, I wasn't the easiest person to get along with. 30 years in the Army has a tendency to do that. I had lost a lot of friends. And I decided that I didn't want any more. I'll have acquaintances, but friends are too expensive. So I went to work with Dean and I didn't know anything. So I followed him around and took notes. He didn't talk to me for about the first year. And we were underneath a mirror cell on the log. And I said to Dean, do you not like me? And he said, why? And I said, you never really say much. And he said, have I ever yelled at you? And I said, no. And he said, then don't worry about it. And so we continued to work together. And one of the things that my wife and I taught our sons was there's two ways you can value yourself. One is what you do. The other is who you are. And I'd like to share a little bit about who Dean was. We all know what he's done over and over again. Dean was my friend. Dean was my only friend. I don't have anymore. In the years that I worked with him, we just sort of drifted closer. And I know a lot of you have done the same thing. For me, it was really special because I didn't trust anybody, I didn't really like anybody. And the other techs that I worked with around here, I hope you'll forgive me for being such a jerk those first few years. Dean changed my life. The mechanism was optics, but his personality and his love of people changed my life. And in fact, in many ways, saved my life. One last thing I want to share about Dean and who he was is my wife, who's with me now, had a kidney transplant some years ago. It was after I had retired. Dean and I still talked, but I was no longer working for him. When she came out of the operating room into recovery, when she woke up, Dean was standing next to her, holding her hand. He didn't say much, just stood there and held her hand. That means so much to her. She still tells that story. We're going to miss the pizza parties. We're going to miss the long talks we had. There's a hollow spot where Dean was, and that hollow spot's never going to go away.
I'm going to make a quick comment from one of our participants on Zoom, Tony Harris. I first met Dean at the Fox Valley Astronomical Society in Geneva, Illinois. His love for science and astronomy was enthusiastic and boundless. As president of the Chicago Astronomical Society, I asked Dean to give lectures on the 8.4 meter mirrors that he worked on. His lectures were wonderful and greatly appreciated. A few nights before Yerkes Observatory closed, I received an invitation to view through the 40-inch, and I could bring friends. Dean had always wanted to view through this great refractor. We had a spectacular night of planets, planetary nebula, and globular star clusters through the great lens. I'm saddened and miss Dean. However, the great mirrors that he helped make will make discoveries for over a century. It's an impressive legacy that will be an important tool to help astronomers unravel the unsolved mysteries of the cosmos. However, no matter how great his achievements and his legacy, we'll miss him dearly.
Good. Yeah. Looks like we have got two more right here. So.
Someone explain to me, when did Dean sleep? I'm Michael Terenzoni. I'm formerly with the planetarium, 17 years, and escaped to Kitt Peak. And Dean was huge in terms of the success at the planetarium for me and for others. We started the star parties on the mall, on the U of A mall, and Gary and Terry Rosenbaum and many of the people in the pictures. And I just came back from the Grand Canyon, and I talked to my clerk about the first official year of the Grand Canyon. Dean said, well, it's your star party now, basically. And it was me and someone else. I think maybe Eric Akash was with me. And I was showing people, and it was a huge responsibility for me, I thought. And he was a very inspiring person. He was as a person from New York, I never met anyone like that. And so he was very important in terms of public outreach, extremely important in terms of public outreach astronomy here in Southern Arizona, and as you've been talking about, around the United States. I just got back from the Grand Canyon, and I talked to my clerk, the clerk checking you in. And I mentioned about the Grand Canyon Star Party, and Dean and I helped Dean start it in 1991. And she said, "Oh, I love that Star Party." And she was so enthusiastic. And it's obvious she's been around for a while. So Dean capitalized on various revolutions in amateur astronomy, the invention of the Telrad, the Dobsonian telescope, filters. There's a lot of history in terms of what happened in the 1960s, especially the 70s. And he's one of the main people who have promoted the night sky. In Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament his handiwork. That knowledge that continually speaks. Dean was a facilitator for that.
Thank you.
I get really nervous talking, but I felt that I would be really remiss not to. So I'm just little Katie that would be engulfed in Dean's huge, huge body and heart. And my 14-year-old son couldn't be here, but he took my son, and Dean didn't know how to be with kids in a lot of ways, but he would just, and my son vomited all over his van, and he patiently but disgustingly cleaned with me. That I thought was one thing. And he took us to draw whitewater draw. He I invited him to come and look through a telescope at with my son's experiment of the tardigrades, which are little water hippos that are microscopic. And he was more excited than my son. And he just almost all of you I know about, because he loved you and he told stories about all of you. And even if I didn't meet each of you, I felt his heart for each of you. Sorry. So silly. But we wouldn't talk for a long while, and then you could just start up a conversation, and he was always willing to answer the phone or to text, and we would tell him that we were standing in a park and he would be in Illinois, and we were looking at something he had told us about, and he would be so excited for us. And he just wanted, I think, to pass on his knowledge to my son. And he gave my son a telescope and helped my son learn how to run it and to be in the Red Garter district at the Stargazer parties, and told him what a Red Garter district really is. And that was the first time my son found out about that. And we went, he made sure we got tours of the mirror lab, and he just made life so much bigger for my son, who would have had a much smaller life without Dean. And I don't want to take up any more time, but he told stories from his heart. And I think that it was so much important that he saw the starlight in people as well as the heavens. And then he told us that my son had influenced him to look at the tiny, not just the large.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Okay, so we're gonna wrap up the larger group here we're gonna have his sister Kathy here give a few words, and then after that we can go ahead and we'll adjourn out to the lobby and out to the courtyard, and certainly not time to leave. Certainly share stories amongst yourself about Dean.
Thank you so much. It's a blessing for us all to be here today, to hear all of your wonderful stories. I'm a very emotional person, so I'm hoping I can get through this, but he loved you all so much. Every one of you. He touched all of our lives. And we are just so grateful to have you all here today and that we can be a part of it. I want to share something that Dean's sister-in-law, Madge Williams, found the other night when she was on the computer. And she sent me a message and she said, you have to read this at Dean's memorial service because it's just so fitting. It's so perfect for him. So I brought it along today and I wanted to close with that because it's just so perfect. It's from the American author Jack London, who lived from 1876 to 1916. So a long time ago. And I have never heard this before, but it's from a book, I Would Rather Be a Meteor. Jack's words. I would rather be ashes than dust. I would rather that my spark should burn out in a brilliant blaze than it should be stifled by dry rot. I would rather be a superb meteor, every atom of me in magnificent glow, than a sleepy and permanent planet. The proper function of man is to live, not to exist. I shall not waste my days in trying to prolong them. I shall use my time. Up to a certain point, it is necessary for a man to live his life in the world in which he finds himself and to make the best of it. But beyond that point, he must create a world of his own. And the greatest thing about life is that it is always giving us the opportunity to create something new. It is never too late to start over, to make a fresh beginning, to blaze a new trail. Life is short, and we have but a brief time in which to explore, to learn, to experience, and to create. Let us make the most of that time, and let us burn brightly like meteors across the night sky, leaving us a trail of light and inspiration for those who come after us. And I think Dean did that. Thank you so much.
Thank you again. And we thank everybody for being here. I said right now there are refreshments out in the courtyard as well as in the lobby. So again, feel free, no need to leave right now. Let's go ahead and be together and share more stories of Dean. Thank you.